welcome to Tell Muses, a podcast for storytellers, with storytellers, by storytellers. And well, it's not just for storytellers, it's for everyone interested in stories and the wonderful art of storytelling. Today, Despina and I are really happy to welcome the wonderful Elena Asciutti. Hello, Elena.
Good morning, Simona and Despina. Thank you for
Hello,
inviting
Elena.
me.
Welcome.
Thank you, Despina.
Thank you for being
Elena,
here.
before we start our interview today, we'd like to remind our listeners that this season 2 of Tell Muses is under the wing of GAWI Festival. Get a Word in Edgeways is the full wording of the acronym. And that is a lovely little festival that takes place every October in England. On the western side, borders to Wales, at a lovely, very picturesque town that's called Much Wenlock. And people are highly motivated, should be highly motivated, after all our recommendations, to get there and live it in person. So, Elena, thank you for being here with us. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much to both of you, Despina and Simona, for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor, of course, to share a conversation with the two of you this morning.
Wonderful. So we know things about you, Elena, that our listeners don't. So would you like to tell people who Elena Asciutti is?
Sure. I'm happy to do so, despite it's one of the most complex questions that people can receive, as you know. I will try to be brief and to put the different pieces of the puzzle together. So first of all, I'm Elena. I come from Italy, more specifically from Sicily. And of course, I'm very proud to come from that beautiful island in the middle of the Mediterranean, even because it's the source of inspiration for the stories that I choose to tell to the audience. I've been traveling a lot in the world because I've been lucky enough to study and work abroad. And so has also influenced my storytelling practice because I've been absorbing stories and fairy tales from different cultures. What I do for a living is to work in a university in international cooperation, partnership. And this, of course, has given me, if you want, the skills of being able to connect with different people and different contexts, which is very much matching with the storytelling, at least the way here, and we interpreted it in a contemporary way. And yes, I'm also a storyteller. So I basically run a storytelling radio show, which is called Diffusione Fiaba. If I do translate, it's fairy tale diffusion or dissemination or broadcasting. And it's broadcast on a radio which is called Radio Cavolo. If I translate, cavolo means cabbage, because in Italian we use a lot to say cabbage when something doesn't work. Oh, cabbage, I lost my telephone. And the radio is based in the university where I work, and it was launched more or less 6 years ago in March 2020 by a group of researchers. So it's not the institutional radio of the university, but it's rather a web community radio where the different members of the university, researchers, staff, professors, students, can produce shows. And so 6 years ago as well, in 2020, I decided to launch Diffusione Fiaba because I felt that there was a space where to communicate about storytelling and fairy tales in particularly, as the title of the show says, to a wider audience. It's a kind of a movement. Stop saying that fairy tales are only for children. They are for children and every age listeners. And the Radio Cavolo is based in Florence, where I'm actually transmitting from. Voila, this is who I am.
Wonderful. And Well, Elena, you told us that the inspiration for the stories you tell is Sicily, the
Mhm.
land of Sicily. And how did your passion for stories and storytelling start? So I know, being Italian myself, that storytelling in our culture is not as widespread as it is in other parts of Europe, for example. But we are from two very distant parts of Italy, because I'm in the very north and you're from the very south. And Italy is really a patchwork of cultures and small communities that create this wonderful patchwork of who we are as a nation.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if you could tell us about your passion for storytelling and how you got involved into storytelling in Sicily and the Sicilian storytelling tradition.
Thank you very much, Simona, for the question. So I have a date. Um, the date is uh, 20th December 2013. I told you that I've been living and working in different parts of the world, but on that day, actually, that night I was back in Catania, my own town, and it's winter solstice that day, not 21st of December. And at that point in time in my own town, they had organized a beautiful solstice event dedicated to the light, Festa della Luce. So light festival, and there were many performances going on at the same time in a beautiful old convent in the city center. So each of the rooms have been transformed in small theater. So you would have singers, actors, or dancers, so different performative arts in the same place, running shows at the same time. So the atmosphere was already magic, and the audience was made of people from different backgrounds and different age groups. And in one of those rooms, there was a storyteller, a Sicilian storyteller. His name is Gaspare Balsamo, who was there alone, and actually not really alone, because he had with him the beautiful legend from the southern part of Italy, which is Colapesce, Nick the fish. And so he told a story that for us Sicilian is like bread and butter, because we listen to this story since we are very small, we are kids. But the way he shared, he transferred the story, he told the story to this audience of people that we were all very close to him, for me was quite like provoking. I mean, I feel literally felt a kind of emotional punch. And then I said, I want to be like him. I know it might sound not very modest, but I take it as a challenge to the self. And so from there, at that time I was living in Brussels, I said, I want to train as a storyteller. I want to get even a little small grasp of what Gaspare Balsamo had shared with me and the rest of the audience that night. So I did. But then it means when I went back to Brussels, after Christmas break, I found out that in Brussels there is a storytelling school, which is called Le Théâtre de la Parole, run by several professional and talented storytellers. So I enrolled, I did a course, but then while I was training, telling, I found out, I mean, I went back really to my childhood, and I realized that it has always been full of stories that had been transferred by different people, especially women. My two grandmothers that would have shared different kind of story. One, the stories of the saints that are as magic as fairy tales, I would say, with due respect to those believing in saints and miracles. And the other one telling me the story of Juva, who is a quite specific characters in Sicily, but also in other countries of the Mediterranean. And then my school teacher. So finally, thanks to Gaspare, I think that this historical memory was unlocked, and I could go back to my childhood and then rediscover the beauty and the pleasure of listening and telling stories.
You know, Elena, I have Sicily very close to my heart being Greek because our story intertwines throughout the
Yes.
centuries, especially the southern part. And there are myths I tell from Greek mythology that end up in Sicily. You know, the
Yeah.
hero finds himself there at the end of their life. So I started telling the life of Daedalus, the great architect who left Athens, went to Minoan Crete, built built the labyrinth for King Minos, and
Yes.
then being pursued after they flew away with his son drowned in the Icarian Sea and everything. He ended up in Sicily, where he was persecuted by King Minos because obviously he knew all the secrets of that kingdom, and he would be, you know, like a liability giving the secrets away to the king's enemies. And it was a nice travel throughout the different seas of the Mediterranean through one myth. If you know, usually we know chunks of a myth, and these chunks of a myth we know are like the peak, the highest, most honorable version of the story. But if you follow any myth, really, like 99% of the myths to the end, in most cases, mortal heroes find a horrible death or something. They don't end up nicely. So I was wondering whether these stories have been woven into the folklore of your region. Do you see ancient patterns, or do you find
Traces.
similarities?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, of course, and thank you for making the reference to Greece. Of course, yes, as you said, there is a lot of connection. Now, not specifically in my hometown, because Catania is close to a volcano, Etna, and so it's subject to earthquakes. But if I look at the groundings of my own town, it's made of Greek buildings and ruins. And so if we go inside the city and we dig a little bit, those ruins, those Greek ruins are full of stories and myths that date back the time that Greeks were there and given birth to the city I come from. If we walk into the inner part of Sicily, there are beautiful Greek temples there standing. So, and of course, when you go there, you start reading a book guide, the Greek myths come there, and as well the story of Proserpina. We know that Proserpina was in Sicily when she was taken away. I use the more diplomatic words. We also know that Odysseus passed by Sicily, and the beats where he had to dialogue with the Cyclops are like 8-10 kilometers away from the place I come. So yes, a lot of Greek myths are embedded in our culture, I would say, at wide. I mean, and I think we also take that pride because Sicily again is because Sicily is also a mix of cultures that along the centuries have come and gone. looking at the folklore, the one that I am passionate of, and this does not mean that I don't like the Greek myth. On the contrary, I think that are fundamental sometimes, even in contemporary times, to explain some of the emotions and feelings of human being. I have not found that connection, but maybe because I have not explored it the way it deserves. What I can find is maybe that elements of challenging that human beings and God, a godness, have in the Greek mythology. I find in many Sicilian fairy tales or folk tales this tension, this challenge, and at the end of the day, let's say, those that are perceived the poor, the vulnerable, have, let's say, the better part of the story. The story ends in their favor. But maybe this tension is very much present. And also I noticed that in the folklore, yes, the Sicilian folklore, there is a contamination by kind of presence of yes, of the spirituality of God, like it's used to be in the myths. But it's a good question that brings me to further investigating that. Thank you, Despina.
Well, myths
Brilliant.
have so many layers. You just
Yeah.
start scratching the surface.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the story you said in my language is the story of Persephone. And
Yes, sorry.
Persephone is the name of my daughter. So you
Ah,
see, I hold it very
fantastic.
dear, very close
Yeah,
to heart, that one.
apologies. I used
Oh,
the Roman translation, and
no
sometimes
need.
we mix it. Zeus, Jove, voila.
Absolutely, both versions are accepted. It's not one is correct and the other is wrong. It's two different names of the same characters. So yes, absolutely. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. That you find the foundations, like both literally and metaphorically, in your
Exactly.
town. So I take it that since you're very close to Etna, that means you have a lot of stories with, I don't know, giants or volcanoes or uh, giant rocks being launched from one place to another. Do you?
Yeah, we do. We do have, of course. There are also names of villages and towns that are taken from nature, like the river, like a mountain. So this is still very symbolic, of course. Yeah, and those cities, or those, well, more than cities, I would say villages, the stories tell us that they were created because there was someone who fell in love with a nymph that was already under the scrutiny of god Zeus, that, as we know, he was very passionate, and so there was a kind of tension, fight, and finally, voila. And so the town is named after this hero that wanted to challenge god Zeus or Jove, if we use the Roman translation. Yeah.
That's brilliant because like Sicily sounds like a crossroad of stories that are linked to other parts of the world. And one of the characters, the main characters that you have already mentioned, actually, that is one of the main characters that we can see in the Mediterranean is Giuffa,
Yeah.
which for those who are not Italian and don't know, Giuffa is the um, uh, name, the Italian name for Joha or Nasruddin.
Exactly.
And I was wondering, Elena, because I know that you're very passionate about Jufa stories. If you could tell us something about Jufa and the Sicilian tradition of Jufa.
Yeah, sure. With pleasure. Thank you. You spotted it. One of the characters I love the most, but I will also talk about the other characters of the Sicilian tradition that I like a lot. So again, Jufai is one of those stories that, as I mentioned before, all the Sicilian kids uh, used to know because it's very popular, and even because when you say to someone in Sicily you are a Jufa, it means you are someone a little bit kind of goofy, that you try to do something but at the end you do exactly the opposite, or if like the kind of incapacity to follow the order. That it can also have a very positive meaning, no? Like to try to find your own way to do things rather than executing from A to Z as someone else order us to do. So Jufa, yeah, as you mentioned, is also known around the Mediterranean with different names. And in Sicily is this young man that usually lives with his mother. There are no news about it, the father, so there is already this very tight relationship with the mother that again can be associated with also a reality in the Mediterranean, the tight relationship between mother and children, in particularly sons. So they live together, and basically, Jufa is often asked by the mother to do something, and he tries to do. At the end of the day, he does it, as I was saying, in its own way, and it seems that the catastrophe is going to come. But likely enough, Jufa is then getting back what the mother had told him. So there is this kind of spike, this climax for the audience saying, oh my God, he has lost all the money. Oh my God, he lost himself in the woods. But no, then there is something out of his authenticity or goofiness. I don't know whether this word exists in English, that helps him to go through and to get back home with that satisfaction that is surprising the mother and above us, the listener. So it's one of those characters that you cannot say a white or black, is stupid or is clever, it's a thief or is honest. I think he brings together the roundness of the human personality, that we are not as flat as sometimes we like to depict ourselves or depict the other ones, but of the complexity of reality. And at the same time, for me, the way I tell it and I feel it, it gives us a kind of sense of hope. And in some of the stories, because there are many, of course, as you can imagine, different nuances, there is a sense of justice. And this brings me, for example, to Nasradin, which is for example, in Turkey, where Nasradin is a little bit more, where Nasradin is wiser than Jufa, if you want. But this justice wisdom is like saying the, the common sense, the collective intelligence can bring us to justice in a way. I really like to think that there is this message of hope in the stories that goes in between Jufa and Nasruddin, embracing all the Mediterraneans if we want.
That's brilliant. And Elena, maybe it's time for a story. Do you have a little story that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, sure. Well, as we mentioned him, maybe I can tell a story from Jufa, one that is very well known. The title is Jufa and the Piece of Clothes. And he says that one day, Jufar mother's has found at the end of the wardrobe a piece of clothes and looks at it and say how beautiful it is, so soft. So if I sell it at the market, I could get some money and then try to live a little bit better with Jufar. But she's so busy in running the house and cooking that she decided to ask Jufar to go to the market. And he said, I recommend myself that you sell this piece of clothes to someone that doesn't speak a lot. And you have to get back at least 3 coins. Did you understand that? And of course, Jufar looks at the mother and says, yes, yes, of course, I'll do what you said. So the following day, he wakes up very, very early because this is when the market's open. He goes out their home, he walks through the village, very proud of this assignment to have this fantastic piece of clothes in his hands. And gets to the market and starts shouting, Stoffa, Stoffa, I saw this beautiful piece of clothes. So a first merchant approaches Jufar and said, oh, where does it come from? What is the material? How much is it? And Jufar said, no, 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 you are speaking too much. And so he leaves the merchant. And then after a while, he's approached by a lady and asks, hey, young man, tell me, how much is the clothes and how big is it? And again, Jufar looks at the lady and say, no, 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 I need, you are talking too much. And so he continues, wander. And he is approached by several people, and at the end of the day, he's not able to have made the bargain. And so he's very sad, as you can imagine, with the piece of clothes and the thinking of going back home to his mother with no deal makes him frustrated. And so he wanders before going back home, and he's so tired that he sits in a small square where suddenly he sees that there is someone. And so he approaches this someone and starts saying about the story, the day, the frustration, the piece of clothes. And this someone didn't say anything. Actually, that was a chalk statue, a beautiful white chalk statue. And so, over a sudden, he said, oh, but you are not speaking. You are the perfect customer, as my mom said. Said, okay, let's do a business. I leave this piece of clothes to you, and I will come back tomorrow morning so you can pay me back. And so he does. He leaves the piece of clothes and he walks back home. You can imagine the reaction of the mother. What did you do? Where is the piece of clothes? How come you left the clothes to someone without getting back money? And he said, don't worry, Mom. I will do tomorrow. So the following day, he wakes up again very early. He goes out the home. He walks through the village streets and get to exactly that small place, that small piazza, una piazzetta. And the gentleman is still there, but the piece of clothes is not there anymore. And so he starts shaking that someone, that statue, but no reply. And he continues, and then he looks around the piazza and he sees a piece of food. So he takes it and starts beating the statue with a piece of wood. And of course, the chalk statues crumbles. And when it's completely broken, Jufar sees that as his food, there is a bag full of golden coins. And so he takes it and quickly goes back home to his mother. He opens the door and he said, you see, I got the money. And the mother couldn't believe her eyes. That was a big quantity of coins. And so she takes the bag and say, very good boy. I'm very proud of you. But now I'll take the money and I will hide the bag, and you will need to shut up. You don't have to say to anybody about this bag. Yes, sure, mother, of course, I will not. But then the mother knows Jufa very well. So after she has hidden the bag somewhere in a secret corner of the house, he says to his son, come, Jufa, let's go to the chimney room. Sit on the sofa and stay close to the chimney. After you woke up very early in the morning, you must be tired, it's a little bit cold. And so after he sits on the sofa, the mother goes up the roof of the house with a bag of dry figs and nuts and walnuts, and throw all of them through the chimney. And so Jufar starts seeing these wonderful things coming down from the chimney and start eating figs, nuts, walnuts, and then he takes a rest. Few weeks later, as in the morning, someone knocks at the door. The mother of Jufa opened the doors, and there are two guards saying, you need to come to us to see the judge because your son has been accused of robbery. So the mother say, okay, I will, and bring my son along with me. And so they go out to follow the guards until they get to the tribunal, in a room where the judge was sitting there with secretaries left to right behind a big desk. And so said, well, madam, I call you in because your son Jufa has been accused of having stolen a golden bag, a bag full of golden coins. And she said, I'm not aware, but please let's ask my son. And so the judge asked, yes, I found a bag full of golden coins. And then the judge asked him back, and when did you exactly find it? Well, judge, the day that figs and nuts fell from the sky. And at that point, the judge said, okay, my accusation is not valid. And so the mother and Jufa could go back home happily, I would say.
How brilliant. I always enjoy these stories. He somehow, being silly as he is, Joha manages to outwit everybody else.
Exactly. And
That's
I
why
also
it's
like
cool.
the mom, of course, that because she foresees, so she does a lot of foresight and prevention, right? She knew that the son would have told this story to everybody. So she used this trick of the figs and the nuts falling from the chimney. Voila. So yeah.
What would we be without our moms? Yeah, absolutely. A tribute to all
Exactly.
mothers.
Exactly. So it's a fantastic folklore couple, I would say.
We call Joha Hoja in Greece.
Hoda, yeah.
Yes, which is like a different spelling of the same name, right? You just change the order of the letters, and you have the same name in a different form.
Exactly.
So I was about to ask you, Elena, how is the storytelling scene in Sicily? Are things happening? Do you have events? Do you organize things? Do you have a club? How is it over there?
No, actually, there is not such a club or association, and thank you for this question. I think that Simona also hinted at this. I mean, Italy is very much diversified. Unfortunately, we don't have an association at the national or regional levels that gathers the different storytellers active. In Sicily, yes, I could say that there are different people, artists that work and perform as storytellers that in Sicilian are nowadays called contista from conto, uh, which is a Sicilian way to call fairy tales, folk tales, stories, what I mean, let's say the nucleo of the oral tradition. And they do bring, of course, traditional folklore to their audience. But at the same time, I have noticed, despite I'm now based in Florence, but of course I keep regular contact with Sicily, that those contista have also a very important authorial role. So behind the nucleo coming from the Sicilian oral tradition, they would write, so they become author of narration performance. So they would use characters and then write a stories that has very meaningful content. For example, in November, I had the pleasure and the honor to go to another performance of Gaspare Balsamo that I mentioned before, and that the performance is called Cunto Saraceno, and he put together Giuffà, Orlando, which is one of the protagonists of the Chanson de Roland, which in Sicily is the Opera dei Pupi. Pupi are like marionette, and Jesus. So you see three important characters coming from different tradition, one religious, one dell'epopea di Carlo Magno, and the other one, as I have just shared with you, from the oral tradition, and they are linked by this original writing. But again, yes, the way is told is the way of the old storytellers, if I have to translate, because it's a little bit, the translation is not literally in a way. So contista basically were, I would say, end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century until 1950s, were usually men that would have stayed in the center of a piazza, a place, or in a bar, let's say in a public space, and they would have told the story of Orlando and the French guards protecting Charlemagne for at least 2 hours. And of course, they would have told the story as it has come to us from mouth to mouth, but of course also interpreting their own way. And those were natural born, if you want, storytellers, because at that time they would not have been a school. They might have received this from their father, and their father from their fathers. And so there was, let's say, an heritage that was passed from one member of the family to other, and they would have get paid. And there are beautiful pictures that around these gentlemen, there would have been a lot of people. And so they would have shared day by day a chapter. And so there was this daily appointment in the afternoon. So everybody knew that at that time of the day, in that specific place, this gentleman would have come and told the story, and they would have paid him back. Of course, now it's a different way of doing that. Then in Sicily, there was another very strong way of orally narrating, orally telling, which was in a way to tell life stories, which is also very popular nowadays, as a form of pre-journalism, if you want. We need to consider back in time that people might not have the capacity to read journals, when all the media were not that developed. This storyteller, cantastoria, they would have gone from village to village to share the fact that it happened in a specific place with their guitar, and they would also have made the beautiful drawings that would have been at their back, so people could follow the different storie di cronaca, so life stories that had an impact on society. So yes, that there have been an evolution, and what I see is a lot of very much interaction between the folklore, to go back to your question, Despina, and to author, the capacity of authoring new pieces starting from the oral tradition. There is a festival in Palermo. I think it has started a few years ago in December. It's called Aedo. So going back, as we were discussing, to the Greek tradition of oral teller. And then here and there are occasions where these contista can show their beautiful performances.
Well, that's a lot to take in, because I was thinking about all these different kinds of oral tradition that are specific to Sicily, and I was wondering, and I don't know if this is a question that you have ever thought about, so don't worry if you can't give me an answer that makes sense. But so you're originally from Sicily, but now you live in Florence, and well, Florence is the cradle of the Italian language, with Dante and with the other poets in 800 years back, let's say. And I was wondering, because another character that created lots of stories that we still tell in the Italian tradition is, of course, Boccaccio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, living in Tuscany now, if you were able to make this connection about seeing the difference between the Tuscanian tradition and the Sicilian tradition of stories and storytelling. Because, of course, the Cameron, they are stories that were written down, but in the Decameron itself, the characters are telling these stories around a fire. And so we see the tradition of oral storytelling there. And I don't know if this question makes sense, but I wanted to see, to check with you if you had tried to see the differences between the two oral traditions, and what you think about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, I mean, the Cameron, it's a fantastica trovata letteraria, because, yeah, this circle of stories, and if we think about that, those young people had left the city of Firenze because of the plague, and so they found themselves in a villa, which is called apparently it's Villa Schifanoia, where part of the university I work for is located. Yeah, and Schifanoia, Noia is boredom. schifare in Tuscany means to push it back. So apparently it was a villa where you would go and to kill away the boredom. So this is what the legend of the legend says. So if we think that they had left Firenze because of the plague, they found themselves in this villa, supposedly Villa Schifanoia, to tell stories. So stories that are in a way helping, no, to forget or to relieve from something that is very sad, because plague brings death with it. It's a fantastic message for storytellers, for everybody, where we go when we don't have anything else to do except to protect ourselves from a pandemic like the plague. But we can also think about more symbolic plague, right? Or sorrows that fortunately or unfortunately are common into our life. And yes, I mean, I have started, of course, looking at it. And of course, some of the stories that the young people that are in this villa during the plague have been based from traditional legends that are known to Florentine, that are connected to special places, either in the city center or in, you know, the first periphery of the city, that of course 800 years ago was already the countryside very far away, but nowadays is completely integrated in the urban fabric of Firenze. And of course, I have started reading different collection, because I'm also interested in this phenomenon that happened in the 19th century with a very important gravitas, the phenomenon of written collection. I mean, Giambattista Basile had done so in the 17th century in Naples. Then the French, Perrault and Madame Delnoy had done it later in France, to please the court or to send them some messages to the French aristocracy. Then came the Grimms at the beginning of the 19th century in the today Germany. And then there was a fantastic compilation of traditional collection everywhere in Europe, and Italy played a very important role. So I like also to compare collection from, especially from Sicily, with two main collectors, Laura Gosenbach and Giuseppe Pitre, with their contemporary here in Tuscany, that then are also taken by Italo Calvino when compiling Italian fairy tales collection in 1956. Well, it's the year of the release, of course. It worked a few years before, so let's say mid 20th century in Italy. And what, of course, I found a little bit different is, of course, the dialect, because the Toscan dialect is much closer to the Italian language. And something else that I notice, I mean, from, again, here I want to be clear on my caveat from the little reading that I have done, the way to talk to the aristocracy. I feel that in the Sicilian folk tale, for example, it's like there is a closer sentiment. I mean, there are several folk tales, as I said at the very beginning, where this challenge, this tension between the poor, the vulnerable, and the authority is very close, very the kind of a motto of rebellion, which I don't find maybe in Tuscany. And then, I mean, Tuscany has every place. is very rich of literary tradition. We cannot forget about Le avventure di Pinocchio, Pinocchio and his adventure that were written here in Firenze by Carlo Lorenzini, known as Carlo Collodi. Collodi is a city that, of course, has taken pride of the story. The story, it's a literary piece, but of course also much influenced by fairy tales, especially the one that Carlo Lorenzini translated from France. There are also women writers, always the same century, 19th century, like Emma Perodi, that wrote a lot of stories, especially for children, but inspired from the oral tradition. And I found this very revelatory again, that the presence of fairy tales or oral tradition has been carried out in a pedagogical way. How come the fairy tales coming from a very far away past can still communicate us some important messages. And again, going back to the importance of Firenze that you mentioned at the end of the 19th century, or the second half of the 19th century, Firenze was the capital of the Italian kingdom for 5 years. So there was a lot happening here from in terms of literature for children, because at that time the level of illiteracy was very, very high, because only upper class children would go to school. So there were a lot of reform in place to allow every child to go to school. So Firenze, with this group of people, as I mentioned, Collodi and Perodi, are two representative members of that circle, where indeed through story thoughtful children, they were trying to set a pedagogical methodology to school, and fairy tales or oral tradition had a very important place in that. Sorry, it was very long. I don't know whether I did respond to your question, but I'm trying, because
that was a very broad question. That was a very broad question. So, Elena, thank you so much for your answer. Yes.
Back to the Cameron. Do you know there is a film version of it, or a miniseries, something like that, in Netflix? That was fun. And of course, I too, like many others, read it throughout COVID times, right? It was the ideal book to read back then, because it was so actually happening again, exactly the same conditions, yes.
Yeah.
So, Elena.
It's okay. You can call it the way you like it.
But now I know the Italian way. I'm not going back to the English one.
Okay.
So, Elena,
thanks.
would you like to share a little story, or not necessarily a little, a story, either that is close to your heart or that comes from your grounds, or both?
Thank you very much, Despina. I'm going to share a fairy tale that, despite does not come from Sicily, is very dear to my heart, because it goes into the essence of telling and listening to story. Because it's always important to remind that when we tell, there is usually someone listening, because without the audience is very difficult. Of course, it's also important that we tell story to the self, but I think it's more meaningful to share them with the audience. So I was lucky enough to get this story from a Belgian storyteller in French. And then I looked for this story for many years, because I wished to have the text, be able to tell it. And then I found it back in a collection of fairy tales by Marina Werner, who was an important authors, and she was also feminist, so she made this collection of fairy tales where the main characters are women, and the name is 1000 Women. And I got it as a present in its Italian version, but finally I found it the book in English. And so now I try to tell as much as I can, and it's an encouraging message that I try to diffuse, to share with the audience. So the title of the story is The Myth of the Tongue. It's a story that comes from the Swahili tradition. So we can say the eastern part of Africa. And it says that in this kingdom, there was a king who was very powerful, rich, and generous. And the king, he had a wife, the queen, who was very sad, skinny, and pale. Despite they lived in a beautiful castle made of white stones, with little windows made of colorful glass. And around the castle, there was a marvelous garden, always full of flowers and fruit and trees. And so you can imagine the smell of those flowers and the colors of the flower and the fruit together. And outside, both the castle and the garden were protected by a wall of stones as well. So in that precise castle, there was a king, rich, powerful, and generous, and a queen, pale, sad, and skinny. And so the king was very active in diplomatic relations, in affairs. He was well known from the neighbors. He was very loved by his subjects, but he had something in his mind that didn't give him a minute of breathe, and was exactly the queen. That queen sat pale and skin. He was always constantly wondering how was possible that the woman that he had married, beautiful, smiling, round, full of energy, had transformed herself in such skinny, sad, and pale woman. And so he had consulted doctors, scholars, scientists from the kingdom, from other kingdoms, and nobody could give him an answer. One day the king was sitting, as most of his days, at the desk, writing, reading, calculating the wealth of his kingdom. And suddenly he stood up and walked to one of those windows with colored glasses. And from that window could look at his beautiful garden. And at a certain point he saw a young woman entering one of the doors in the wall, walking through the garden, smiling and carrying a basket in her hands. And the women, after walking for some minutes in the garden, stopped in front of the gardener. So the king decided to go there, and he walked through his big office room, went down the stairs, through the door, and then he stopped in front of the gardener. The woman in the meanwhile had already left. And so he looked at his garden and he said, "You have to tell." And the gardener immediately stopped and said, sorry, my lord, she was just my wife. She brings me food. I don't care. I just want to know, how do you feed her? She's so beautiful, so smiley, energetic. How is that possible? What is the credit? What is the secret? How do you feed her? And the gardener looks at the king with this question in front of him and replies, with the meat of the tongue. The meat of the tongue? Yes, my lord, the meat of the tongue. So the kings go back inside the castle, goes down the stairs, and he goes into the kitchen and look for the chef, and then stops in front of him and says, tomorrow, lunchtime, I want a banquet full of dishes made of the meat of the tongue. All the animals we have in the kingdom, all kind of recipe, grilled, fried, à la vapeur, and with all the spices we have in our kingdom again. And so the chef looked at the king and said, I will. And so the following day at lunchtime, the king go into the dining room of the castle and he found exactly what he wanted, a long table with dishes made of the meat of the tongue of different animals, chicken, rabbit, cows. And so with this sparkle of hopes, he goes to call his wife. She is in her bedroom and she said, my love, come with him. Come with me. I have a surprise for you. And when they walk through the corridors and then they get to the dining room and the queen sees that table, that, what's this? I can't. And she ran away. As you can imagine, the king was frustrated after all these efforts. And so again, he runs down the stairs, he goes to the garden and looks for the gardener. And when he finds the gardener, he says to him, listen, the meat of the tongue did not work out with my wife. Now we will do this. My wife, the queen, is going to go back home with you. But my lord, I live in a hut close to the bushes. It's very simple. It's very humble for the queen. I don't care. The queen will come with you today, and your wife is going to be with me in the castle. We will do this for 6 months. So they did that. Days, weeks, months, and at the end of these 6 months, one morning, the garden goes to the castle together with the queen. They enter the door in the wall, they go through the garden, they walk the other door, the steps, and they finally get to the office where the king was already at work. And when the king hears that someone has entered, he looks up and